Exodus 34, 6 and 7 is the first description of God's character and the most quoted passage in the Bible. It speaks of God, of the God we all love, who's gracious and merciful, kind, and so forth, but it speaks of the wrath of God who punishes the guilty as well. Jeremiah 2:13 starts with a verdict. It states, "My people, the children of Israel, had committed not just one, but two crimes. In violation of the first commandment, love God, simply love God, they'd forsaken him. They'd forsaken him and committed the age-old error of man of relying on himself, on his work, on his hands, instead of God's grace." John 4:10 tells us that as Jesus was talking to the woman and the lady at the well, seek and you shall find, right? Ask and you will receive the living water. He elucidates in John 7:37 to 39 that anyone who thirsts that comes to him for a drink, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. Rivers of living water. The living water is not Jesus the man, but the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit that dwells in believers and brings faith, hope, love, all the great things, all the things that we like about Exodus 34:6. All those things come simply by seeking God, who they had now forsaken. But when the people do not seek God, which was their first sin, they're like darkness without light. They're like land without water, barren, desert. There are two ways to get water. You can get it directly from its source, or a river, or in those days, the second way, they could dig wells or find vessels to capture water. And that's where their mistake was made. They built these cisterns, these wells that, as the verse here, Jeremiah 2:13 tells us, were broken. So they weren't successful at being able to capture the water that God freely provided. They were makeshift. So the purpose of their work was futile, in contrast with Romans 9:16, which tells us that it does not depend on human desire, but on God's mercy. They traded in living water for broken wells. Man was guilty of replacing God as God with his own efforts, which were a dysfunctional substitute, the effects of which were the lack of a means to capture the water they sought. By simply seeking God, their issues would have been solved. They would not have been subject to the imminent attacks by idol worshippers from the north. Period. The fruit of their efforts turning from God and seeking their own means resulted in them being conquered by the Babylonians, which resulted in the exile of many subsequent generations of Jews who were born or lived outside of their homeland because of the sins of their mothers or fathers. God is gracious, but he also punishes the guilty, and the effects of which are felt by their progeny.